For centuries, we have known the famous Ten Commandments as the fundamental rules God gave to humanity. But did you know that the Bible never uses those words? In this video, we will reveal the true name of these divine laws and delve into their original meaning. Discover how, throughout history, language and translations have influenced our understanding of these precepts, and learn why it is crucial to know their correct designation in order to comprehend their power and purpose in our lives. Join us as we explore the richness of divine revelation and uncover this fascinating mystery. Let's start with the original Hebrew text. When Moses descended from Mount Sinai with those 2 stone tablets, they were not called the 10 Commandments. In Hebrew, they are known as Aseret Hadibrot, which translates to the 10 words, not commandments. This term is the one that appears in the Torah, the foundational text for both Judaism and Christianity. Why are they called words instead of commandments? The choice of the word words is intriguing, as it can be understood as statements or expressions of truth, and not necessarily carrying the weight of orders or mandates. In the ancient context, these 10 words were seen more as a covenant between God and his people, a set of guiding principles rather than strict mandates. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, the term Decalogue was used, which also means 10 words. The Greek translators chose to preserve the essence of the original Hebrew phrase, suggesting continuity in the way these tablets were understood, not as a set of rigid laws, but as 10 expressions or divine statements. Why did the original texts use words instead of commandments? It could be that the nature of these instructions was meant to be more relational than authoritative. This wording allows room for interpretation, suggesting that these words were meant to guide rather than impose, to form the moral fabric of a community instead of establishing an authoritarian standard. So what happened? How did we come to call them the 10 Commandments? Let's look at how these texts were translated into the Latin Vulgate, an early and important translation of the Bible. The term din verba, which also means words and was used. This phrasing kept the idea that they were divine statements rather than direct orders, aligning with the original Hebrew and Greek texts. This suggests that early Christianity still viewed these 10 statements in a broader, more nuanced light. Let's move to the 15th century with the rise of William Tyndale, one of the first translators of the Bible into English. He referred to these divine statements as the 10 verses, again, not commandments. This choice further emphasized the idea that these words were more than just a list of do's and don'ts. They were verses, almost like those of a poet or a sacred text, meant for contemplation and guidance. Here's where it gets interesting. Why did the early translators continue using terms like words or verses? It could be that they were trying to preserve a certain theological perspective, perhaps wanting to keep the focus on the spiritual, moral, and covenantal aspects of these 10 statements, rather than framing them as a strict legal code. Now let's analyze the change that took place in the Reina Valera version of the Bible, one of the most influential and widely recognized Spanish translations. It was in this version that the term Diez Mandamientos, 10 Commandments, began to appear, a change that marked a significant departure from all earlier translations that referred to these divine decrees as the 10 words or the 10 verses. But what motivated the translators of the Reina Valera to choose the term commandments instead of words? To understand this, we must consider the historical and political context in which this Spanish translation developed. The Reina Valera was the work of Cassiodoro de Reina and Cipriano de Valera in the 16th century, a time when monarchy and the church had considerable control over the interpretation of religious texts. The idea of a set of commandments fit into a hierarchical structure where orders came from a higher authority and had to be obeyed without question. At that time, the power of monarchs and the church was directly linked to the will of God, and religious texts reinforced this authority structure. By using the term commandments instead of words, the translators framed these statements in a way that demanded absolute obedience. This interpretation fit the political and religious context of the time, focused on authority, obedience, and control. When they called them commandments, the Reina Valera reinforced the notion that these were not just guiding principles, but strict laws that required unwavering compliance. Cassiodoro de Reina and Cipriano de Valera, who translated this Bible into Spanish, were aware of the complex meanings of the words they chose. At the same time, They lived in an era when the Catholic Church and political authority sought to impose certain doctrines and norms. In translating the Bible, Reina and Valera chose to frame these texts to adapt them to the theological environment of their time. This worldview emphasized that authority came directly from God and extended through the church and the monarchy to their subjects. This vertical model of power and obedience was an effective way to ensure that the faithful understood their place in the social and religious hierarchy. Framing these divine decrees as commandments instead of words or verses made it clear that they were not suggestions or guidelines, but mandatory laws that had to be followed. This change had profound implications for Christian doctrine and practice. The term 10 Commandments quickly took root in religious teaching and over the centuries shaped how generations of believers understood these ancient decrees. Instead of being seen as part of a covenantal relationship between God and his people, they became a list of rules to follow, often without questioning. This shift in terminology raises a broader and more intriguing question. If such a significant change in interpretation occurred with the 10 words, what other aspects of the Bible might have been altered or renamed in a similar way to serve specific agendas? Could other biblical terms or concepts have been adapted to reflect the political or theological needs of those in power? This is an interesting question that invites us to delve into the history of biblical interpretation and translation, reminding us that translations of sacred texts are not merely linguistic exercises, but also influenced by the cultural, political, and religious contexts in which they are made. In the end, whether we refer to them as words, verses, or commandments, we must remember that these are sacred decrees given by God to humanity. Each ordinance carries a divine purpose, calling us to live in obedience. It's not just about following rules, it's about recognizing that through his wisdom and love, God offers us a path to live in harmony, peace, and justice. These 10 words not only reveal what is right, but they also guide us toward a full and meaningful life within his will. Each commandment presents an opportunity to draw closer to God, reflect on our actions, and align our lives in communion with him. These principles are not arbitrary. They are an invitation to live according to the values of God's kingdom, reflecting his character in our daily lives. Obeying these commandments is a way of expressing our love and commitment to God. Rather than being burdensome, they deepen our relationship with him and with those around us. Let us remember that the ultimate purpose of these commandments is to guide us in love, respect, and integrity, so we can fulfill the mission God has set for us. As we walk this path of faith and trust, let's recognize that every commandment is an opportunity to grow spiritually and live in the truth and justice of our Creator. Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey. I invite you to watch more of our videos on the screen. If you found this video insightful, please share it and subscribe to our channel for deeper insights into biblical stories and their hidden meanings.